Did you get your overflow of that yet?
He's $7.
You actually took the other off and lost it, or? Probably roll away. Yeah.
So I don't know if I'm through or I can go what, so.
I think so. We'll see.
Yeah, that's Jackie. Oh, she got a thing about True Green also.
Nice to do that. Than the desk.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
Good. Hey, how you doing? Are you feeling better with your knee here? I heard you had a knee problem.
Yeah, better.
I have a knee problem. It's called arthritis.
Well, I'm sure that's what it is.
It takes a lot of effort when you got to carry your husband.
That was when I was younger and stupid.
Good mark. Mine just waves.
Right now? I fall down again. So, yes, I'm not sold. I'm not falling for that one, I don't think. A little bit ago, heart surgery. I almost got me though. I mean, the places are beautiful, like, because they have all the food. They have all the videos of that. Like I said, definitely watching, so I'll see a little bit of it. Amazing areas, like just Nashville is Nashville. I mean, any big city has its areas, but like, the suburbs are just quintessential like, American town.
But kids have seen it and they yeah.
That's
because there's nothing.
which housing market there.
It looks even worse today. I took those a couple days ago. Trying to stay home for a couple more days, see how bad they get, and then we're gonna.
Out of here.
I have to keep them tied like double bags, so they smell really bad now.
Well, that's the same thing. Like if you take our bus and move it 20 miles that direction, it's worth twice as much. Yeah. There's some huge.
Matt.
Especially because Nashville is growing that. Because Tennessee is same rate Nashville is expanding. So like becoming an Atlanta type growth, you know how all of a sudden Atlanta they're good. Nashville might see something.
Well, sometimes
I'm pretty much doing a good job. Considering me training now. I'm doing which hopefully today
oh.
Yeah. 42 hours. Hi, Jane. So hopefully that's not a recurring.
Kind of chilly, but good.
What's that?
Kind of chilly. Good.
Yeah.
What happened up here?
40 seats. They painted them all and painted them. Trying to get a little work
So
done.
Logan arrived home and I texted him. I'm like, "Are you at home?"
Are we live?
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
Good thing I decided to wait on that comment.
Say it.
Now I want to hear it.
I was to Robert.
What were you going to say?
Exactly.
You causing trouble?
Always. That's my MO, I think, right? Some people just come naturally to it. I come naturally to it. All right. Today?
Oh, no, but you got me now.
We got you now.
Are the services the same time on?
Yep. Yep. Same times.
Yeah, I got an invite. My kid wanted me to go over the wheels.
on Wednesday.
with him and his mother over to Edgewood, and I said, no,
No?
I already got a church I'm going to.
He's off.
Off and running.
He is. Always on the move.
Well, we're spread out maybe a little bit different, but we got some of the tables, we've got folks working on the ceiling, and so we just kind of grabbed what we could and threw the tables back around. So looking pretty good, looking pretty good.
Table too.
So, well, let's go ahead and go to the.
He's down in the bottom. Talking smack.
You haven't even done anything yet today, have you, Bob?
No. Feel like roadkill. Everybody's picking on me, man.
Yeah, you look like roadkill too.
Well, let's go to the Lord in prayer. Our Father, we do thank you for the night you've given to us. Lord, we thank you for everything that you've blessed us with. We thank you for good friends. And Lord, we just pray that you be with us tonight. Help us to learn from your word and to grow thereby. In Christ's name, amen. Amen. All right. Well, we're still in Judges, and we're still talking about Gideon. I jokingly said last week that Gideon might turn into, a 6-part, 8-part, 20-part series. So we're on part 3 tonight, and we're certainly not going to exit Gideon yet by the end of tonight. If we do, then most of you won't have any sleep for tomorrow. So we'll stop somewhere, as the Lord leads, we'll stop, and we'll continue on next week. So we're in Judges chapter number 7. Judges chapter number 7. In Judges, we ended last week in Judges chapter end of chapter number 6, and we were talking about the fleece, the account of Gideon and the fleece.
My notebook, developed legs and that.
Left. So after the fleece, which is probably what I would say the second most famous account of Gideon, we go into probably the most famous account of Gideon. And the reason I would consider it one of the most famous accounts is because it is certainly the account given to children quite often, right? We talk about the battles, we have the certain battles that we talk about, Joshua fighting the battle, and then we talk about Gideon and his battle. So chapter number 7, we start with this. It says, then Jerubbaal. Anybody remember what that means? Without, or even if you look back, I guess that's fine. But Jerubbaal, that was Gideon's nickname, and where did he get it?
From mocking, throwing down the altar.
From throwing down the altars, right? And his dad Joash, the people came and they say, well, we need to kill Gideon. And Joash said, basically, let Baal defend himself, right? Jerubbaal. It just means let Baal contend. Let him defend himself. And that was what Gideon's nickname became. Let Baal defend himself. Just like God defends himself, right? Let Baal defend himself. So it says, then Jerubbaal, who is Gideon, and all the people that were with him, rose up early and pitched inside the well of Harod, so that the host of the Midianites were on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. First and foremost, as we look at this, and we'll get a better number here in a couple of verses, but it says, and all the people that were with him. And we understand that as Gideon is up here, and he's pitched beside that well of Harod, that if we hearken back to Judges chapter number 6 and verse number 35, remember it says, and he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, who also was gathered after him, and he sent messengers unto Asher and unto Zebulun and unto Naphtali, and they came up to meet them. So he has a gathering of the Israelites that is coming to him. Also remember that there was a gathering of in verse 33 of chapter number 6, it said that all the Midianites and the Amalekites and the children of the east were gathered together and went over and pitched in the valley of Jezreel. So we have here two groups gathering. We have the Israelites gathering under Gideon, and then we have the Midianites and the Amalekites gathering together to go to war it's at least inferring there that they're gathering together to go to war against Gideon and Israel. So here they are. They're gathering together. Verse number 2, chapter number 7. As always, I'm going to be looking down and looking up. If you've got comments or questions, anything you want to add, by all means, jump in. If I talk over you, say, hey, Brother Fox, be quiet, or whatever, however form. I want to talk. And then we'll just arm wrestle and go from there. So verse number 2, and the Lord said unto Gideon, the people that are with thee are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, mine own hand hath saved me. I've got a couple principles that I've written down for tonight as we read through this, things that will guide us in our Christian walk and principles of God. And the first one we find here is in verse number 2, and that is that God doesn't want man to take credit for his work. That's a principle, that the things that God does, he doesn't want man to take credit for. He wants to make sure that the people understand that he's the one who has the authority, he's the one that has the power, and he's the one that is able to make things happen. He doesn't want people to take credit for his work. It says, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me, saying, mine own hand hath saved me. It applies to many things in our life. It certainly applies to salvation, almost doubly so, but absolutely it applies to salvation, that it's God that provides salvation, that man has no part in getting that salvation, if you will, or in providing salvation for himself. It is always, and it can only be, of God. When our great memory verse, Acts 4:12, neither is there salvation in any other, right? There's none other that we can call upon. It says, for there is none other name under heaven given among men whereby we must be saved. So in salvation, we cannot take any credit in providing salvation of ourselves. And that's one of the principles that is found here, that God is telling Israel that there's too many of you. That if you were to just go to war with the amount of people that you have right now, you might get it in your heads that you did it yourselves, that you were able to accomplish all of this without any of my help. So he says to Gideon, you've got too many people. There's too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands. And that same, again, applies in our Christian walk as well, that as we do things, that we must give God credit for the things that we do. Because what happens is when we start to find ourselves like high up on that mountain, and we start to find ourselves strong, and we start to have victories in our life, that suddenly, we may get the idea that, well, I've made it, right? And I'm doing all this by myself. Look at how strong I am. And the Lord has to come in and teach us something, which is the second principle. And I know we're whipping through these principles. You're like, boy, it's going to be a short night. Ha, had you met me. But principle number 2 is this, that in order for us to understand principle number 1, sometimes God has to strip us of ourselves. Sometimes God has to look down at us and say, listen, I am God, and in today's vernacular, you need to understand your relationship, who you are and who I am. And this is what God is trying to teach Gideon and actually Israel as a whole, that I am God, and I am the one who gives the victories, and I am here for you. It says in verse number 3, now therefore go to, proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from Mount Gilead. And there returned of the people 22,000, and there remained 10,000. So we're given a number here on how many people had, at least, fighting folks had come together. It says the people came together. So we get, who's good at math besides, how many people were there? 32,000 people have gathered to Gideon. 22,000 have now left, right? They're gone. And they left simply based on the one stipulation, that if you are afraid or you have fear, go ahead and leave. So roughly 2/3 of the force now have left because they were afraid of what was about to happen. Now, why were they afraid? What were they looking at? Masses of Midianites, right? We find later on in Judges 8, and I think, did somebody say the number?
32.
Later on in Judges chapter 8, we find that there were at least 135,000 Midianites, at least. Because we're given that number in Judges chapter 8, that 120,000 Midianites had died, and that there were only 15,000 left at that point in Judges chapter 8. So if you can think that Gideon has brought folks together, and they're sitting at, that 32,000 people, and you think, boy, that's a lot of people. But you put 32,000 next to 135,000 people, and you'll notice a difference, right? You'll notice a pretty significant difference there. A factor of 4, if right about, if my math is right, a little higher than 4 times the folks that are there. So they're looking at this massive amount of people. So I don't know that we can stand up here tonight or sit down there tonight and say, well, I wouldn't have been afraid. Boy, 2/3 of the people run away. What a bunch of cowards they are. And I think even in the Thompsons, it shows in the sidebar, cowardice on there. But I don't know if I would lay that up against cowardice so much as I would lay it up against maybe unbelief, lack of faith in God.
Yeah, it starts out in the Thompson, weak, faint-hearted, and the last part is cowardness.
Yeah, weak, faint-hearted, cowardice, all pretty strong words, but I think they all kind of wrap themselves up in maybe lack of faith. Because here they are, they're in front of masses of people. The enemy is seemingly unbeatable. And isn't it interesting that at this moment God says there's still too many of you, right? At 32,000, God said there was too many of you, even though the force that they were going against far exceeded the amount of people they had. So then God says, ask anybody that's afraid or fearful, and let him return and depart early. 22,000 leave, and there's only 10,000 that are left there. Verse number 4 then goes on. It says, the Lord said unto Gideon, the people are yet too many. Bring them down into the water, and I will try them for thee there. And it shall be that of whom I say unto thee, this shall go with thee, the same shall go with thee. And of whomsoever I say unto thee, this shall not go with thee, the same shall not go. So we have again, God says there's too many of you. All right, you need to understand that this is going to be a miraculous victory. That it is only through the power of God that it is even possible that you are going to win this. And I think, God has given us many examples in the Bible, and I believe that the Lord's given me examples in my life, and He's probably, if we went around the room, we'd find examples in our lives where God has shown us His strength, right? God's shown us who He is. He's shown us His power. Maybe He's stripped us down, from the high, lofty places that we've been at, and pulled us down to that level where we understood that it was only through the power of God that we were able to do what we needed to do. Proverbs 3, 5, and 6 is a series of verses that helps reinforce that in our lives, right? Trust in the Lord with all thine heart. And then what does it go on to say? And lean not unto your own understanding, right? That you're not supposed to lean unto thine own understanding. And then it says, in all thy ways acknowledge Him, and He shall direct thy paths, right? So the kind of the challenge to the Christian is to not lean on our own understanding of things, right? If I was God, I wouldn't have done it that way. right? That's a very dangerous place to be in. If I was God, that's not how I would have done that. That's not, I wouldn't have allowed that to happen in their life. I wouldn't have allowed, this loved one to pass away, or I wouldn't have allowed this one to get sick, or I wouldn't have allowed this to happen. The challenge to the Christian is to not lean on our own understanding of those things, but to trust in the Lord with our whole heart in everything that we do. Trust Him in that. And this is what He is trying to teach Israel. Trust me, I'm going to strip you down so there's no possible way you're going to win this fight unless I come into it, right? Now this is the book of Judges, so we, having the hindsight of reading the book of Judges, we understand that it's a lesson that Israel doesn't tend to learn, right? They learn it in little pockets here and there, but they never try totally stay in it. And isn't that an example of our lives as well? That you ever get to that point where you're like, man, but by the grace of God, there I go. You ever have something happen in your life where you're like, man, if God hadn't been there with me, there's no telling where I'd be right now or what would have happened to me. And then yet, maybe a month later or a year later, you find yourself in a situation where maybe you need to have some humility brought upon you, right? Maybe you need the Lord's hand to say, hey, you're thinking too much of yourself here. Let's strip a couple of these these weapons that you have away, and let's learn to trust back in me as well. So here we have this shall not go with the same shall not go. So verse number 5. So he brought down the people into the water, and the Lord said unto Gideon, everyone that lappeth of the water with his tongue as a dog lappeth, him shalt thou set by himself, likewise everyone that boweth down upon his knees to drink. So that, that just means that the folks that drink this way, put over there. The folks that drink this way, put over there. Don't let them mingle together. Let's separate them into two different groups. And then verse number 6 says, and the number of them that lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, were 300 men. But all the rest of the people bowed down upon their knees to drink water. Now there's been a lot said about this, and there's probably a ton of application for this. I don't know that we'll fully go into that tonight, but the picture that you have here, and this is hotly debated, I will tell you that, on what the picture is here, but those that, where it says that they lappeth like a dog, right, would be those that didn't drop down fully onto their knees. It's a question of, maybe they squatted down and they would cup water and then they would just kind of splash it into their mouth. You ever see a dog drink where it cups its tongue and it kind of scoops the water and throws it into their mouth with their tongue? The human tongue doesn't do that, right? So, but that's the picture, is that the water is kind of being thrown into their mouth a little bit at a time. So they would, kind of, maybe they crouch down and they're pulling water and they're throwing it in, trying to get the water lapped up into their mouth a little bit. Now the picture of the others, it says, but all the rest of the people bowed down upon their knees to drink. The picture of that would be that here's a bed of, a creek of water, and they're down on their knees like this, and it's got their head stuck in there, and they're sucking the water up, trying to get enough to drink within them. Now there's a lot of speculation there as well, but the thought is that the 300 that didn't go down on their knees would have been men that were being vigilant, right? That were still able to defend themselves. If somebody came up, if a fight began right there and then, those folks would have been ready. Maybe they were looking, maybe they were throwing water in their mouth. Where the people that were down on their knees with their head in the water would have been easy pickings. That's a thought given there, is that the 300 that God chose were quite possibly men of experience, or men that kind of knew what they were doing in warfare, so to speak, as well in there. Now, there are a couple other applications that we could look at in there, and like I said, there's probably been 100 different messages given on the picture that is happening there as well. But one of the other things is that you don't get as much water when you're lapping it like a dog, because like I said, our tongues don't work like a dog's tongue works, right? A dog's tongue is built for that. And even though the dog's tongue is built for that, they still lap pretty quick, don't they? You ever watch a dog drink water? You don't even have to watch them, do you? You can listen to the dog lap water and you know how fast they're going. You're blah, 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 blah. You know, it's just going like crazy. But the man's tongue doesn't work like that. Yeah, talking about Bob? No. I just saw some pointing
He
going
said
on.
laughing, not flapping.
He's over there giggling.
He's over there giggling.
Hit home with him.
When they have matches in the martial arts, you bow to the referee. When you bow to your opponent, you always keep your eyes up on your opponent when you bow over. You never take your eye off of it.
And we
The
got-
guys that were lapping, they were still able to keep an eye on their surroundings.
Yeah.
So that, you know, that's what, like you said, it's contested, but that's what I think, so.
And the other thought about that is that the folks that were sticking their head down there and drinking as much water as they could were maybe a little bit focused on themselves a little too much, like they wanted to get as much as they could. So here they are, they got their head down in the water and they're lapping it up. They're just drinking it up as fast as they can, and you kind of, there's of course a principle in Christianity about self-denial, right? That when it's time to work for the Lord, it's time to deny self, and it's time to do the Lord's work. And that is a picture as well in that the folks that were, you know, lapping like a dog, they weren't getting much every time because they were about the Lord's business, and kind of self-denial versus chugging the water as they were laying down there on the ground. So, but here you go. You've got those that lapped like a dog, and then you've got those that were bowed down upon their knees to drink the water there as well. Any other discussion on that? Like I said, there's a lot of things that have been
They're
said.
probably trying to get minnows too, the ones that were down.
Minnows, yeah, they're probably hungry, and they're trying to get some
Fish,
crawfish.
yeah.
Crawfish.
Minnows in the water.
So then it says, and the number of them that lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, were 300 men. But all the rest of the people bowed down upon their knees to drink water. And the Lord said unto Gideon, by the 300 men that lapped will I save you, and deliver the Midianites into thine hand, and let all the other people go, every man unto his place. So the people took victuals in their hands and their trumpets, and he sent all the rest of Israel, every man unto his tent, and retained those 300 men. And the host of Midian was beneath him in the valley. So now we have gone from 32,000 folks that are with Gideon down to 300. So that is what, about 1%, less than a percentage, less than 1% that he started with, he now has. I think that's right. Somebody who's better at math, play those numbers, but I'm pretty sure it's 1%.
You're pretty close.
Probably 0.92. But here we are, 300 have stayed. But then we get into kind of an interesting section here. So the Lord has now stripped as much away from Gideon as possible in order to show that it's the Lord's battle. But we have in verse number 9 something very encouraging to the Christian, and that is, and it came to pass the same night that the Lord said unto him, arise, get thee down unto the host, for I have delivered it into thine hand. But if thou fear to go down, go thou with Phurah thy servant down to the host. Now, and I always say this, but you know, if somebody's thinking about kids in the future, I mean, Phurah, how about that for a name, right? It won't get picked on at all at school. That'd be a fantastic name. But he says, if thou fear to go down, go thou with Phurah thy servant down to the host. And we have a third principle here. So we have the first principle that God doesn't, you know, God doesn't want people to take credit for his work. In order for us to understand that, sometimes God has to strip us of ourselves, pull us down to, so that we truly understand how frail we are compared to him. And the third principle is that God knows our frailties, and he gives encouragement to us because he knows we need it. You notice here that it doesn't say anywhere that Gideon is balking at the order, right? It doesn't say in verse 8.5 that Gideon was now afraid and worried that God wasn't going to deliver the Midianites into his hands. But it does say, if thou fear to go down, go thou with Phurah thy servant down to the host. God says that to Gideon. So God understands the frailty of humans, right, of his creation. And we notice as we start to read through here that Gideon probably was afraid because he takes the Lord up on the offer. He says, if thou be afraid, go with Phurah, go to the host, go down there thence. So God is willing to give encouragement. And isn't that a wonderful thing? That God knows how really kind of weak we are, right? How frail we are. And that God's going to give encouragement. Even if sometimes you don't even ask for it. You ever, and this is a good example or a good thing to think of, you ever have a friend or a parent, a sibling, maybe not a sibling because that doesn't happen ever, but that encourages you without you having to ask for it? Somebody comes up and says, hey, you're going to do great at this. You're going to do a good job at this. There's nothing that's going to come between you and this goal that you have. That just gives encouragement. It's a great example of, God's the best encourager there could possibly be. Because when God's on your side, who can be against you? And God wanted Gideon to be full of assurance. He's like, go down. If you're afraid, I'm going to show you something. And that's what he does. Romans 8:31, what shall we say then to these things? And of course, Romans 8 was all the things that were happening to the Christians, the torment and everything. It says, if God be for us, who can be against us? Right? God, it's an encouragement to know that God is on your side, no matter what the situation is. Verse 11 says, and thou shalt hear what they say, and afterward shall thine hands be strengthened to go down unto the host. Then went he down with Phurah his servant unto the outside of the armed men that were in the host, and the Midianites and the Amalekites and all the children of the east lay along in the valley like grasshoppers for multitude, right? Now get the picture in your head of that 135,000, at least 135,000, plus all of the animals that they have, and you think about what it takes to feed an army of that size, right? And to just have provisions for an army of that size. And you have just all of these folks, and it says that they lay along in the valley like grasshoppers for multitude. Their camels were without number as the sand by the seaside, for multitude, just tons and tons of animals there and people there. In verse 13, and when Gideon was come, behold, there was a man that told a dream unto his fellow and said, behold, I dreamed a dream, and lo, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the host of Midian, and came unto a tent, and smote it that it fell, and overturned it, that the tent lay along. And his fellow answered and said, this is nothing else save the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel, for into his hand hath God delivered Midian and all the host. So we have Gideon and Phurah as they go down here, and God has providentially prepared these men to be exactly where Gideon was going, right? Because God is going to encourage him. You think of, we think of coincidences. Well, there's no coincidences with God. You think of at least, and we throw that number out there, and we know that it was more than that. There were tons, 135,000. The odds of Gideon, just randomly and coincidentally walking up on the one guy that had a dream about the destruction of Midian, and then one that's interpreting it, and them waiting to talk about said dream until Gideon is there, are just astronomically impossible. So we can see this as nothing else than God's hand moving and putting Gideon and putting those gentlemen exactly where they needed to be to encourage Gideon. Not only that, but God would have been the one that would have given that dream to that individual as he was out there waiting. And of course, the interpretation of the dream. So you get the feeling, though, and this is a great encouragement, is it not, that the whole host of the Midianites are actually afraid of Gideon's host, right? They're like, well, this is nothing else than Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. And it says, for into his hand hath God delivered Midian and all the hosts. So you get this picture that quite possibly everybody in the host of Midian is now shaking in their boots. They're thinking, God's delivered us into his hand. And yet here we are. We're all massed together, and they're worried about what's going to happen to them. But isn't that a great encouragement to Gideon? Verse number 15 tells us, and it was so when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and the interpretation thereof, that he worshiped. The first thing he did was worship. He starts to thank God for being his God. He just worships God for being who he is and for delivering the Midianites into his hand. So God has encouraged him to the point that he is now into worship, right? He is just worshiping God. That term worship, I like to define it as a reaction that we have to God moving in our lives, right? If you are truly worshiping God, it's because God has moved in your life and you have recognized something about God that just moves you to worship him, right? I think a lot of folks have that maybe confused, where they think worship is something that, is an excitable thing for them, right? That it's something that is towards them. But worship is always from man to God, right? And it's always us giving God worship and putting him and lifting him up into the air. It has nothing to do with us wanting to make ourselves feel better. Now, the very act of worship ought to make us feel better, but that worship is always man to God, right? It's not intended to be, a stimulation, if you will, to mankind. It's intended to be, it's a reaction to God moving in our lives. But here he goes. He has this vision, or he sees this vision and the telling of it. The first thing he does is he worships God. He doesn't even return to the host of Israel yet. He worships God. And then it says that he returned into the host of Israel, and it said, arise, for the Lord hath delivered into your hand the host of Midian. And then we'll go through this real quick, and we can stop if anybody has comment on it. But
So, I always wondered why there were so many, but I guess if you stop and look at it, they knew who Gideon was, even though at this point did he fight a battle before this?
So I think they would have known from chapter 6 when he tore down the altar of Baal and cut down the grove.
But they also know that he sent out to all the tribes to request people to come unto him.
Yeah.
And I mean, like, if you send messengers out, people are going to talk. Like, that's what they're supposed to do. And that obviously would have gotten back to the Midianites, which may have been why they invited the other groups to come along with them to the battle, because they're like, hey, like, this might be a big turnout. We might have an issue here. And so, but they knew it was him, which is amazing. Like, they knew his name at this point, that he was the commander of the army. So they obviously knew it from those
messengers
that went out, that were gathered against him. But even the 32,000 that would have been there, they were afraid of them, and God's going to take it down to just 300. Not that they know that, but they were afraid, even though they outnumbered him 4-1.
Yeah. And it could be just like what you said. They probably had spies, more than likely. They had people feeding them information. And they may not even have known at this point, because this is all happening in fairly quick succession here, where God's peeling away the folks and sending them back to their tents, back to away from the fight. They may be thinking, you know, Israel's a pretty big nation. How many people have shown up? You know, and they're afraid, but it is interesting that they know Gideon. You know, he's known.
So the other thing is, when the man dreams the dream and he interprets it, that guy doesn't give any glory to God. But as soon as, and like you were saying, he's paring it down so that it can't be anything but God. And Gideon knows that. So instead of him saying, like, hey, they know me, he worships the Lord immediately, knowing that if anything's going to come of this, it's going to be God, because there's no other choice.
Yeah, yep. He thanks the Lord, and the Lord has given him really another sign of assurance, right? Because the host is afraid of him, that he's going in there, right? And this is nothing else save the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash. They know who he is, right? You can't go back home because they know your address. They got your phone number and they know what car you're driving, and they're looking for you, right? This is no one less than Gideon, the son of Joash. And this is a man of Israel. So they know that he's of the Israelites. And it says, for into his hand hath God delivered Midian and all the host. So the interpretation's there.
What I think is kind of ironic here is they worshiped Baal,
Yep.
I think it was, but they still knew of God, and they knew it was all powerful. So if one man had that dream, maybe there was more in there that had that dream. So when Gideon did what he did to them, they were so scared by then they couldn't.
And it's possible.
Let's run.
It's possible that God gave that dream to more than just this guy, right? That it has been voiced abroad. And maybe he gave the interpretation to more than this guy. And now, you know, the Midianites are good and scared, right? They're ready for a fight. They don't know who's going to live. They don't know what's going to happen. But they know of Gideon and what he has done in the name of God. So, absolutely. It says that he divided the 300 men into 3 companies. So if the math is right, there's 100 in each company there, right? He put a trumpet in every man's hand with empty pitchers and lamps within the pitchers. And he said unto them, look on me and do likewise. And behold, when I come to the outside of the camp, it shall be that as I do, so shall ye do. When I blow with the trumpet, I and all that are with me, then blow ye the trumpets also on every side of all the camp, and say, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. So Gideon and the 100 men that were with him came unto the outside of the camp in the beginning of the middle watch. This would be in the middle of the night, sometime between 10 and 2, middle watch there. And they had but newly set the watch, and they blew the trumpets and brake the pitchers that were in their hands. And the 3 companies blew the trumpets and brake the pitchers, and held the lamps in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hands to blow withal. And they cried, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And they stood, every man in his place, round about the camp. And all the host ran and cried and fled. You notice they didn't attack. They have broken the pitchers. They have the lights in their hands. They're blowing the trumpets. And they just stand there, right? They're not charging down the hill yet, to thinking that they're going to slay everybody that's down there. It says they stood round about, but the host starts to run, cry, and flee. And then it says, and the 300 blew the trumpets, and the Lord set every man's sword against his fellow, even throughout all the host. And the host fled to Bethsheba in Zerah, and to the border of Abel Meholah unto Tabbath. And the men of Israel gathered themselves together out of Naphtali and out of Asher and out of Manasseh, and pursued after the Midianites. There has been a lot said about the tactics here, right? And you go into it, and I'll just say this, that I do think that those tactics were divinely inspired, that the instructions were given of God. But we have to be careful in crediting the tactic, right? Because verse number 22, and of course it's half on one page and half on the other in my Bible, but it says, "And the 300 blew the trumpets, and the Lord set every man's sword against his fellow." So like I said, there's a lot been said about the fact that, yes, it would appear that there was a much greater host. That when they broke those the pitchers and they had the lamps, that the folks would have looked up and they would have thought, well, maybe there's 300 divisions of troops coming against us, and there's 300 trumpets blowing, and they think maybe there's just a massive amount of troops coming to attack us, kind of like what we were talking about. But the fact remains that it was the Lord that set every man's sword against his fellow. So the Lord moved, and they started attacking each other, right? They started attacking each other. If the Lord hadn't moved, it was very possible that the tactic wouldn't have worked. That they would have just maybe been afraid and started fleeing, and then when they realized, hey, there's nobody attacking us, maybe there's not as many as we thought. But in the hysteria, God moved enough and moved men to start fighting and attacking each other. And they start attacking each other, which brings me to principle number 4 tonight. And that is that the battle belongs to the Lord. Right? No matter what our tactics are, it belongs to the Lord. You know, we have to really take that to heart, that in any fight that we have, that it's not in our own strength. The battle's God's. And He may give us tactics, but we still, even after God gave those tactics to Gideon, Gideon still had to trust in the Lord to complete it, right? To have the victory. The victory is always in God. 2 Chronicles 20:15, "Thus saith the Lord unto you, be not afraid, nor be dismayed by reason of this great multitude, for the battle is not yours, but God's." Right? No matter what we go up against, let's not be dismayed about it, because the battle's not for us to fight. It's the same thing when you're to take to heart when you're witnessing to somebody, when you're trying to share with them the gospel of Christ, and they either shut the door in your face or they tell you they don't want anything to do with it. Don't take personal affront to that. Don't be, it's okay to weep for that, right? Because you weep for the soul that has rejected God. But don't take it out on yourself. Well, if I'd only said this better, maybe if I'd had 5 more verses memorized, maybe if I'd started this way. And it's okay to kind of reflect on a little bit of that, but never get to the point where you're blaming yourself for somebody not getting saved. And on the opposite end of that spectrum, if somebody gets saved, don't say, well, look what a great soul witness. What a great witness I am. Let's notch my belt, because that has happened and does happen, where people think, boy, I'm so good at this. Man, well, it's not our fight. It's God's fight. All right? It's not, the battle belongs to Him, not to me. We're just the vessel. We're just the thing being used. We're like it's always, I've heard it, compared to a pen, right? We're the instrument of use. God does the direction, and God has the fight. Remember, now that was 2 Chronicles, is Old Testament. The battle is not yours, but God's. And in the New Testament, remember that the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, right? But mighty to the pulling down of strongholds through God, right? It's only through God that those strongholds are pulled down. It may have been great military strategy, but if it hadn't been for the Lord being in it, they wouldn't have won. The Lord moved. We get in, and I think we'll stop probably. We'll just read these last couple verses in chapter number 7, and we'll stop there and continue next week. But it says, "And the men of Israel gathered themselves together out of Naphtali and out of Asher and out of all Manasseh, and pursued after the Midianites. And Gideon sent messengers throughout all Mount Ephraim, saying, Come down against the Midianites, and take before them the waters unto Beth-barah and Jordan. Then all the men of Ephraim gathered themselves together and took the waters unto Beth-barah and Jordan. And they took 2 princes of the Midianites," that's the Ephraimites. "They took 2 princes of the Midianites, Orib and Zeeb, And they slew Oreb upon the rock Oreb, and Zeeb they slew at the winepress of Zeeb, and pursued Midian, and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeeb to Gideon on the other side Jordan. So the battle has been won. The war continues, and Gideon is calling, the Ephraimites, and he's calling those from Ephraim and Naphtali and Asher and Manasseh, and now they are pursuing in order to, destroy the Midianites, so to speak, to finish the fight as they go. So, chapter number 8 is the, I guess this is common, New Age vernacular, but chapter number 8 is the snowflake chapter. You got people being offended because they weren't used how they thought they should be used, and people, but we'll talk about that next week. Any other thoughts?
He sort of got his hand up.
Sort of got his hand up, 2 fingers.
I was just gonna say, I think it's interesting that this passage is very reminiscent of Joshua and Jericho,
Yeah.
where they were given an odd tactic, but in the end, as long as they placed their faith, in the end, they won the battle.
Yeah, they were given, if somebody would, in today's day and age, either one of these tactics, right? All right, here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna march around the city, right? And then you're gonna yell, right? Then the walls are gonna fall down. Really? Really? I mean, that takes a lot of faith, right? And it is an odd tactic, because God wanted them to place his faith in him. Today's day and age, here's what we're gonna do. We're gonna send 99% of our army home, right? And we're just gonna go with some pitchers and lights and some trumpets. Don't bring your weapons. We'll just do this. You'd be laughed to scorn, from most tacticians. But again, it's a tactic given by God to show God's power and God's action within that. So no, absolutely. Yeah. And it's interesting, aren't those the 2 battles that we tend to teach children? Joshua and Jericho, right? Gideon and the Midianites. Right? They're easily acted out, right? You've seen the kids act out the scenes. Right? But they show great faith. Anything else?
The other one, teach children, is David and Goliath.
David and Goliath. David and Goliath. Let's go up against this heavily armored guy with a couple of stones.
I know if it hadn't been for the Lord, I wouldn't have been in my own apartment. So, I went from being to where I couldn't even get around to where I'm getting around and got my own car now, and it's all from God's help.
Yeah. Amen. He's been healing. He's been touching. Yeah. I remember praying, being worried that maybe the next time we'd see Wayne would be in heaven. And I don't want to say it. I don't want to.
Yeah.
But I remember praying that. And now look at him buying race
I
cars.
was here all the time.
And now we can't get rid of the guy.
He looked pretty rough, I know that.
Buying Nissan race
And I
cars.
hope you're here every minute, but
I couldn't don't say that, man.
I gotta have somebody to pick on.
Yeah, I know.
Can't pick on Bill, he just looked at me.
I was gonna say what you were saying earlier
He don't understand.
about learning the lesson over and over and over again. It's amazing the times in your life you go, oh, wait a minute. I remember learning this earlier.
Yeah.
I've been here before. I remember this lesson last time I had to learn it. But you learn it again. It's not, you don't figure it out until you go through it a second time and you go, oh yeah, I remember this.
Yeah. Like a dog lapping up its vomit. There's no better picture in the Bible.
So much
Than a dog turning to his own vomit again. And that's what we do. I think of